In Northern Ireland, temperatures in Edinburgh and Belfast up to 20 Celsius perhaps. We are looking at those showers, though, further south, importing them from France, heading steadily northwards, and we'll see a few more of them, I suspect, by Thursday evening. A sign of things to come as high pressure is replaced by not one but two areas of low pressure. These two are going to combine to bring a much wetter spell through Friday and the weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we should be looking at in depth. Keeping me company today is former Labour MP Stephen Pound, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. He was the Soviet leader who helped end the Cold War. Tributes are paid to Mikhail Gorbachev. Is it time for our cop shops to wake up and not woke up? A damning report putting policing in the dock. And a quarter of a century after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, we look at the tragedy that shook this country to its core. Well, that's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, in a break from royal tradition, the Queen won't return to London to meet with the newly elected Prime Minister and Boris Johnson next week. Instead, Mr Johnson will travel to Balmoral in Aberdeenshire for their final meeting with him in the post. Of course, we don't know yet who the next Prime Minister to meet the Queen will be. This week is the final few days of campaigning between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Tonight, they go head-to-head in the final hustings. Boris Johnson is warning that the Kremlin is intent on undoing the good of Mikhail Gorbachev as he paid tribute to the former Soviet leader. US President Joe Biden is among a number of world leaders who've praised Mr Gorbachev's legacy following his death at the age of 91. He's widely recognised for his role in bringing an end to the Cold War. Today, Mr Johnson accused Vladimir Putin of attempting to recreate the Soviet Union.
Mikhail Gorbachev is one of those people who triggered a series of changes that perhaps he didn't anticipate. Maybe he paid his own political price for it. But when history is written, he will be, I think, one of the authors of fantastic change for the better in the world. And What I worry about today is that the current leadership in Moscow is intent on undoing the good that Mikhail Gorbachev did.
The government has set out plans to sell £1.5 billion worth of its offices as part of a new property strategy. The aim is to move public sector workers into fewer buildings over the next 3 years. Well, the Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg says Whitehall is cutting public costs so money can be returned to the taxpayer. The government also says it's aiming to save £500 million by using different energy sources. New figures show food is rising at its fastest rate since the financial crisis in 2008. The British Retail Consortium say the annual increase in fresh food prices jumped to 10.5%, up from 8% in July. It's products like milk and margarine that are going up the highest. They say the war in Ukraine is continuing to put pressure on food prices. Royal Mail workers are striking again today in ongoing disputes over pay, with further industrial action planned. The Communication Workers Union says more than 100,000 members are involved, making it the biggest strike of the summer. The action follows a walkout last week in a protest at a 2% pay rise, although the company says more money is on offer. Further strikes are planned for Thursday the 8th and Friday the 9th of September. Rail companies have announced further strikes for the end of September. The TSSA union say staff at 9 train companies, as well as Network Rail, will walk out from midday on Monday the 26th for 24 hours. There have already been several days of industrial action over the summer as thousands of transport staff walk out over pay and conditions. A team of inspectors from the UN's nuclear watchdog have arrived at the Russian-occupied power plant Zaporizhzhia. The International Atomic Energy Agency are going to inspect the nuclear plant for damage after weeks of shelling nearby raised fears of a radiation accident. The team say they're hoping to stabilise the situation.
With all clarity, my mission is a technical mission. It's a mission that seeks to prevent a nuclear accident and to preserve this important, the largest, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, in the whole of Europe, not only in Ukraine. So this is what we are concentrating on.
The cooperative group is going to sell its chain of petrol stations to Asda in a deal worth £600 million. The sale will result in 5% of Co-op's entire estate, including 129 petrol forecourts, handed over to Asda. Around 2,300 Co-op staff will also be transferred once the deal is complete. NASA will make a second attempt at launching a rocket to the moon this weekend after the first takeoff was postponed earlier this week. It's the Artemis 1 mission flight that had been due to launch from Florida's Kennedy Space Center on Monday. It was called off over technical issues. Well, the flight is now set to blast off from Cape Canaveral on Saturday afternoon in a 6-week test flight around the moon and back. But there is a 40% chance of favourable weather, so the operation may yet again be clouded with issues. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to Alex for today's We Need to Talk About.
Glasnost and perestroika, transparency and rebuilding. 2 words likely lost on millennials, but that shaped their lives, even if they don't know it. Because Mikhail Gorbachev, the great Russian reformer, oversaw the dismantlement of the Soviet Union, the modern-day Russian Empire, and in doing so, brought peace and security to Europe. Something his successor, Vladimir Putin, has today shattered. A man we can do business with, the words of Margaret Thatcher said of Gorbachev following years of Cold War that put the planet on the brink of all-out destruction. By giving Poland back to the Poles, Hungary back to the Hungarians, and saying a Tsar acts like a Tsar, but I am not one, he dragged Russia into modernity, healing long-held wounds, and ushered in an era of relative peace from which generations now know no different. As the former Russian president is remembered today, how poignant it is that it's against a backdrop of the progression he built, once again being bludgeoned. Well, joining me first is Giles, who's a senior consulting fellow on Chatham House's Russia and Eurasia programme. You spent some time in former USSR. How would you describe Gorbachev's legacy?
Well, that's one of the most striking things that's coming out from all of the tributes and remembrances of Gorbachev that we're seeing today. And it's the very different way in which people remember him, depending on where they were at the time. Now, we're seeing a lot of people in the West hailing him as the person who brought about the end of the Soviet Union. But at the same time in Russia, he's being condemned for precisely that. We're getting lukewarm praise from President Putin and Russian state media saying he understood the need for reform. But also he'll go down in history as person who should be reviled for actually bringing about the collapse of the USSR. And then there are the countries in between, where you have a very different picture. In places like the Baltic states, in the Caucasus, in all of those parts of the former USSR that aren't Russia, he is remembered as the person that tried to keep the USSR together and instituted bloody clampdowns on independence movements. So where you stand on Gorbachev really depends on where you sat at the time.
And, I mean, he succeeded a sort of string of what people would consider quite heavy-handed rulers of Russia. Was there anything about his governance that marked him out as very different to that?
In a way, yes. He did realize that the Soviet Union was heading into a dead end and it needed reform in order to survive. But that's the key point. He's credited with bringing about the end of the USSR, but that's actually what he wanted to prevent. He wanted to keep it viable. He wanted to reform the Soviet economy so that it could actually continue to fund the Soviet war machine. Instead of seeing the Cold War as being irrelevant, he wanted to make sure that the Soviet Union would not actually lose it. So put all of that together and you have a situation where Gorbachev recognized that things needed to change, but the changes he instituted, and in particular, glasnost that you referred to, the policy of allowing people in Russia to say what they wanted and say what they thought and discuss openly facts and news and opinion, something they're not allowed to do again now, was what really precipitated the end of the USSR, because that political system could not withstand honesty.
So when we're hearing reports today of essentially Gorbachev saying, you know, if the Poles want Poland back, they should have it. This wasn't necessarily a choice, a heartfelt decision by him, but something that he felt he had to do reluctantly.
Yes, we need to think about different stages in a very fast-moving process as Soviet power started to unravel, and also a very different approach to Russia and the Soviet Union, its power over Eastern Europe and what it thought of as its own dominions of the USSR. So Gorbachev warned Eastern Europe that they had to take matters into their own hand for their own security, but at the same time was clamping down at home and trying to make sure that those nationalist movements that were allowed to exist through glasnost, that were allowed to actually promote the idea of independence for all of these not sovereign nations that we see today, didn't get out of hand and cause the disintegration of the USSR, which in the end, of course, they did.
I mean, he's been out of the public eye for a couple of years now. We understand he was battling quite a long illness, but what do you think his position would likely be on Putin's actions today?
Well, as you say, he has been very quiet about that. We know that he was firmly in favor of Russia's annexation of Crimea. And there is an old saying among Russia watchers that Russian liberalism, Russian liberal views end where Ukraine's borders begin. So it's not unusual for people who otherwise are quite liberal and Western leaning to think actually Ukraine should be a part of the Russian Empire in exactly the way that President Putin says. But he has been unwell for some time, as you say, and his relevance to Russian politics has been very limited. Not just in the last few years, but really since the end of the USSR in 1991.
Keir, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Thank you so much for that sort of candid and very balanced appraisal of the life of Gorbachev. Fascinating stuff. Well, I'm joined in the studio by Alexander Temerko, a Russian businessman who studied in Moscow, later joining the Russia government. Sorry, you're Ukrainian, Alexander. I did not mean to say Russian. Before leaving, as he strongly opposed the rise of Vladimir Putin. Now, Alexander, you actually knew Gorbachev personally. What sort of a man was he?
First of all, I want to say
Last night we lost a great personality, a global politician, and I want to express my deep condolences to everybody who had a chance to work with Gorbachev, his family, friends, and everybody who lived in the time of Gorby. I'm Ukrainian, and for me, personality Gorbachev is very important because he's an open opportunity, a peaceful opportunity for my country, where I born, where I live, and where I studied, left Soviet Union like a global prison with very big ideological inclination, when nobody can build career except or against vision then or the communist vision in the Soviet Union at that time. And you're right, I had a very great chance to meet a couple of times with Mikhail Gorbachev after his resignation, and every meeting with this man was very important and very impressive for me. Last time I met Gorbachev in London, and his birthday is at university in Albert Hall. That was almost 11 years ago. He was very optimistic, very energetic as usual, and he never talked about triviality. He talked about global process, about future, and about better opportunity. That is my vision of Gorbachev.
I mean, listening to what Giles said there, which in many respects sort of struck me as a man who is very lambasted in Russia for overseeing the breakup of the USSR, and perhaps that wasn't something he wanted to do, because a lot of the reports coming out today here are sort of hailing him as this great peacemaker. Where would you put him on that spectrum?
Absolutely, you're right. He is a great peacemaker. He is definitely no warmonger person, and all his intent, what he wants to do peacefully. He almost dismissed Communist Party on the peaceful level without civil war. And he opened a window for Europe, denuclearization, disarmament on peaceful level. His meeting with Ronald Reagan, with Maggie Thatcher, it was open with Kohl, Chancellor of Germany, opened the massive door to deliver the peace, global peace in Europe and the world. But actually, if we talk about Gorbachev, he is a man of opportunity. He is a tragedy, big human tragedy, is a spectrum tragedy, because all his initiative never completed. He can't complete this initiative. But for me, it's a very symbolic meaning as well, because it's like a great ruler who started to build church, cathedral. He can't finish that. I mean, he left chance to next generation, completed it. In the next generation, people deserve to complete this cathedral to this church. They done that.
Stephen, I can see you sort of nodding at some things. I mean, what are your reflections? You've been around in politics long enough.
I've been in the same room as Mikhail Gorbachev. I've never had the intimacy that Alexander had. But there's two people who haven't been mentioned in the great sort of Niagara of praise, which quite rightly has been flowing over Mikhail Gorbachev. One is Raisa Gorbachev, his wife. Nobody ever knew Mrs. Kozygin, Mrs. Andropov, Mrs. Khrushchev. But having been in the same room and see the way that she was a real asset to him, and we'd never seen this before. I think there was a sighting once of Mrs. Khrushchev, but I think that I may have thought she was a shot putter or something. She was quite a terrifying woman. But the other person that's not been mentioned is St. John Paul II. John Paul II's role in the end of communism, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the bringing down of that wall, cannot be overestimated. And the confidence that he gave people, particularly in Poland, but really across Europe, Central Europe, to actually give them their confidence to say there is another way. He gave them that strength and that determination, and they proved their resilience. Don't forget, in my generation, I remember the Hungarian uprising being crushed. I remember Czechoslovakia. I remember when the Russians would send the tanks in. They couldn't send the tanks into the Vatican. And Stalin's old thing about how many divisions has the Pope. Well, in fact, the Pope had many divisions, and I don't think we should forget his role here.
I mean, finally, we don't have long left on this, Alexander, so I just want to give you the last word. I mean, how do you want Mikhail Gorbachev to be remembered?
Great leader. A very good comparison as Stephen was Holy Pope Paul II, peacemaker, and a person who opened opportunity for my generation to build better world. That is my vision of Gorbachev. And if I try to find today personality equal Gorbachev, I can't find equal personality. That is a very unique man when Bernard maybe one on the 100 years.
Alexander, Stephen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your memories and your opinions. I want to have yours as well. Do you have any insights into Mikhail Gorbachev's legacy? How should we be remembering him? Let me know, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews. You're with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, Home Secretary Priti Patel tells police to get back to basics after a report says officers are distracted from solving crime by woke causes. It's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast. I'll be back in a bit.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine bright day out there for most today. Sunny spells, a bit breezy across the south. Most places are dry, but there are just one or two showers around. High pressure is dominating, but around this area of high pressure, the breeze is coming in from the North Sea. So it's pretty fresh on some of those North Sea coasts. The isobars closer together across the south, so quite a brisk breeze blowing along the south coast as well. And that breeze is bringing in a bit more cloud across eastern England. There are one or two showers over northeast England. It could drift into southwest Scotland this afternoon, and maybe one or two more for Lincolnshire down towards Nottinghamshire. But for the vast majority, it's dry. Many seeing lengthy spells of sunshine. Feeling quite warm in that sunshine. The Midlands down to South Wales, 22 to 24 or 25. A little cooler across Scotland and Northern Ireland. And certainly it does feel fresh on those North Sea coasts south of Lincolnshire. As we go through the night, not a great deal of change. Any showers will fade away pretty quickly this evening, so it's a dry night with clear spells. Temperatures holding up in the teens in southernmost parts of England, but elsewhere quite a cool night, certainly for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures well down into single figures in rural areas. A chilly start then here, but generally a sunny start to Thursday. Very similar day, actually. The breeze perhaps a little lighter in the east, but again, one or two showers are possible over northeast England, but few and far between. For most places, it's going to be dry. The main exception will be across the Channel Islands, where we are expecting some showers late in the day. Slightly warmer day tomorrow across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures in Edinburgh and Belfast up to 20 Celsius, perhaps. We are looking at those showers, though, further south, importing them from France, heading steadily northwards, and we'll see a few more of them, I suspect, by Thursday evening. A sign of things to come as high pressure is replaced by not one but two areas of low pressure. These two are going to combine to bring a much, much wetter spell through Friday and the weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, something has gone very wrong with policing here. 1 in 7 forces is under special measures due to failure to investigate crimes properly. Report your car being nicked or house being burgled and you're likely to be told it's a lost cause, if the cops do turn up at all. But be reported for saying someone with a penis isn't a woman and they'll be banging on your door. At least that's apparently the perception of 40% of us who now think the police are way too woke to bang up baddies. Think tank Policy Exchange say it's high time things were shaken up, with Home Secretary Priti Patel agreeing. The report also calls for tougher measures against eco-zealots, more police assigned to online security to tackle child abuse, as well as an app to report local crimes. The big question, surely, is do we have enough coppers to do it all? Well, earlier, the Prime Minister defended police officers over accusations they're being distracted by woke causes.
Well, I've just seen them. I tell you what, just seen a bunch of police officers who woke quite a lot of drug dealers this morning, and they woke them long before they were expecting to have their breakfast. They woke them with warrants, and they woke them with the news that they were under arrest for causing misery in the communities of London. And that's what I want the police to do. That's what Priti wants them to do. I thank them for what they're doing. They do an absolutely fantastic job.
Well, I'm joined in the studio now by former Metropolitan Police Officer Chris Hobbs, who's alongside former Labour MP Stephen Pound. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? One horrific report of a policeman who, brutally murders a woman, and all the police are misogynists. One terrible incident in America, and all the police are racists. One small section of a police force in Lincoln doing the Macarena, and all the police don't care. They'd rather do dance routines. What is the situation, do you think, Chris?
The situation really is that police officers would want to investigate crime, and most of the time they are having to do other things. The previous Chief Inspector of Constabulary, not a very popular man, Sir Tom Windsor, the one who many people view as the architect of the cutbacks, was before the Home Affairs Select Committee a few weeks ago, and he said only 20% of police time is devoted to crime. If you talk to police officers at the sharp end, they will tell you much of their time is mental health. Somebody went on a ride-along a few weeks ago with police, met police on a night duty. Every call they attended was mental health. A friend of mine's a mental health nurse. Steve may be aware of that individual. She liaises with police. She has nothing but praise for the way police are having to deal with serious cases, people wanting to commit suicide, police talk them out of it. People locking themselves in cars, stabbing themselves to commit suicide, police break into the car, drag them out and save their lives. No one's really interested in that, but that is what the bulk of policing is like at the moment, because the mental health services can't cope. They're simply not there to do what they should be doing. And that's part of the problem. Police want to tackle crime. They're expected to deal with all the other problems in addition to crime. And as Steve said, there's not enough of them.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's quite familiar to me where I live in London. Very often people who look pretty disturbed having to be, mollified and contained by police. But, I mean, something you brought up to me before we went on air was the police also having to deal with huge events like the Notting Hill Carnival. I mean, a horrific number of incidents.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think we need to have, probably GBNews is one of the few places in this country that we can have a serious, proper talk about the future of the carnival, and I think we should. But in the first place, can we just actually get back to first principles here? The real rotten cause for this, the problem we have with policing in this country is between 2010 and 2020, we lost 20,000 police officers. It was actually felt by Home Secretaries, never mind which party they came from, to actually felt that we could do more with less. You take 20,000 officers, good people like Chris Hobbs, who's actually been at the sharp end, suddenly in a shrinking force. The police stations are closing. You know, Norwood, Greenford, Hanwell, Greenford, Ely, all the police stations around my way closed. The courts are closing. So if you don't have the infrastructure of justice, how on earth can the police do their job? If you nick somebody in Ealing now, you have to take them to Heathrow Airport.
Blimey. I mean, he's got a point, hasn't he? Because looking at this other sort of menu of things that Policy Exchange, a think tank, wants to see happen, I mean, some of these are involving an app where local people can say there's some vandalism or disruption, there's hacker cops to deal with online crime. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because the nature of policing's changed. This isn't just policing happening on our streets to stop people kicking in doors and attacking people and nicking handbags. There's a whole new world of virtual crime also taking place, and not enough bodies to deal with a lot of it.
That's right. And one of the criticisms those on the right make of police, they're spending all their time in front of computers looking for hurty words. Complete and utter nonsense. Utter nonsense. If they are in front of computers, it is looking for sexual predators. It is looking at fraud cases. They don't want to be in front of computers. Part of that is what policing is all about. But they want to be out there locking up criminals. And the bad press they get, constantly you've got newspapers, not GB News, hunting around for bad news police stories. The Met deal with 2 million emergency calls a year. Some of those are going to go wrong, but most of the time, police give help and it goes right, but no one seems to be interested.
And I mean,
in
people
that.
think the police are on the side, don't they, of the activists in the culture war, the protesters, you know, helping people who glue themselves to tarmac and all the rest of it. But they often don't fare well in those culture wars. They're accused of racism, they're accused of misogyny. They had to deal with the whole defund the police movement.
I have to say, you know, I've known Chris for many, many years, and I've known a lot of police officers, and, you know, I wouldn't do that job for all the tea in Whitehall. It's a hell of a job to do, and you're always wrong. You're always wrong. But look, there's a couple of things that I think the police in London at the moment are a riot squad. You know, they're not people knocking on doors and investigating burglaries, they're a riot squad. And one of the reasons they are that is because that is what the demand is. Because the thing with policing is it's not just about how many people you nick, it's about reassurance and deterrence. And when you had that blue lamp shining, when I was on the buses, we used to actually drop runaways off at the police station, you know, I'd actually divert the bus because there was a police station there. There are no police stations now. If there are, they're few and far between. And you cannot quantify deterrence. You cannot put that on a spreadsheet and say, this is the value, because we've actually lost sight of the value of deterrence and reassurance. And you know, I'm not talking about Dixon, a Dock Green and warm oval team by the fire and all that nonsense. I'm just talking about the presence of a uniformed police officer, not twerking and not doing the Macarena, but doing their job.
I mean, Chris, I mean, there's Priti Patel. I mean, it seems to me she's doing a typical Priti Patel and, you know, saying things that she thinks are going to resonate. But, I mean, what do you think does need to happen? Because it's quite clear that the police are up against having to fight new crime. They're also up against, you know, a reputational damage at the moment, the likes of which they probably haven't seen before. What needs to be done to help the police do their jobs properly?
Two things, really. First of all, more police. The French, similar population to us, bigger geographical area, yes, true. They've got 100,000 more police officers than we have. So we need more police. We need them probably better trained because the old training schools have gone. There's new training methods, and to be frank, there's a lot of criticism of them. And I think the other thing is better comms from the police, because when police do something right, it very rarely gets any publicity. Carnival. Police delivered a baby on the streets of Carnival with the crowds milling around them. Got a little bit of traction, but not very much. Now, to me, that's an interesting story. That's good, positive policing. Even the rapper who died, very difficult situation, but police were in there trying to save his life, as they do frequently across London. They're often first to the scene of stabbings, they're administering first aid, and often they save life. But Met Comms, those who should be putting out good news stories, finding the best, not just responding to the worst, I have to say, police officers at the sharp end would like to see a bit of an overhaul there, so the public are aware of the positive side of policing, the good and brave things they do, and they do them every day. But unfortunately, most media outlets, be it the Mail, be it the Guardian, they're on the hunt for stories where things have gone wrong. They're not interested in positive policing. Sadly, the only time when you seem to get sympathy from those media outlets is when a police officer dies, when there's a tragic incident within the police family. But good news stories with the police, Nobody seems terribly interested, frankly.
What do you think of the wee girl?
Very briefly, because I've got to jump to the news, so make it...
The wee girl who was shot in Liverpool, a police officer took her in his arms, held his hand against the wound, blood all over his uniform, and carried her to the car and rushed her to the hospital. That is policing. That's real policing.
Stephen,
I've respect.
Chris, thank you so much. Really wonderful comments there. Let me know what you think as well. Do our police officers need to get back to basics, or do they just need a little bit more help to let them do their job? Email me, gbviews@gbnews, or tweet us at gbnews. You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Coming up tonight marks the final hustings in the Conservative leadership campaign at last. This time next week, we'll have a new Prime Minister, but with Liz in the lead, is it all still to play for? Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 2:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Queen's going to break from royal tradition next week by not returning to London to meet Boris Johnson and the newly elected Prime Minister. Buckingham Palace says Mr Johnson will instead travel to the Balmoral estate in Aberdeenshire for his final meeting with the Queen as head of the Conservative Party. Well, the announcement from Buckingham Palace comes in the final few days of campaigning between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak for the post in number 10. Boris Johnson's warning the Kremlin is intent on undoing the good of Mikhail Gorbachev as he paid tribute to the former Soviet leader. The US President Joe Biden is among a number of world leaders who've praised Mr Gorbachev's legacy following his death at the age of 91. He's widely recognised for his role in bringing an end to the Cold War. Today, Mr Johnson accused Vladimir Putin of attempting to recreate the Soviet Union.
Mikhail Gorbachev is one of those people who triggered a series of changes that perhaps he didn't anticipate. Maybe he paid his own political price for it. But when history is written, he will be, I think, one of the authors of fantastic change for the better in the world. And what I worry about today is that the current leadership in Moscow is intent on undoing the good that Mikhail Gorbachev did.
The government has set plans out to sell £1.5 billion worth of its offices as part of a new property strategy. The aim is to move public sector workers into fewer buildings over the next 3 years. The Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg says Whitehall is cutting public costs so money can be returned to the taxpayer. A team of inspectors from the UN's nuclear watchdog have arrived at the Russian-occupied town Zaporizhia. The International Atomic Energy Agency are going to inspect the town's nuclear plant for damage after weeks of shelling nearby raised fears of a radiation accident. The team say they're hoping to stabilise the situation. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's head back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And breathe. Because tonight marks the final hustings on the 2-month-long vanity tour in the battle to become the next Prime Minister. The successor to Boris Johnson is due to be announced on Monday and will enter number 10 in the mire of a crisis, the likes of which hasn't been seen in generations. The perfect storm of a geopolitical whirlwind driving up energy prices and clogging up supply chains. The canker of 2 years of economic rot as the world locked down due to COVID, and the shadow of the mountain of inflation cast long over the nation's prosperity. The confused stumbling of a country that's failed to see through a long-term plan in decades. There's a lot to do, and get the medicine wrong, and the treatment could be worse than the disease. So can either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak hold back the coming flood? Well, joining me now is Greg Marsh, founder of Nous.co, a service which offers people free advice on how to deal with rising costs. So I'm going to go first to Greg. We're also, there we are, joined by political pollster and co-founder and director of Delta Poll, Joe Twyman, and former Labour MP Steve Pound is also still with me. Greg, energy, still the big topic of the day. You must have been listening to this leadership debate and the promises being made, or lack of promises being made. Are you hopeful that we're going to get the right person to do the job that desperately needs doing?
I'm looking forward to the end of it, actually, as much as anything, because it's what we haven't heard that's concerned me the most. You know, both candidates have been, I think, playing their cards very close to their chest about the specific urgent help that UK households are going to need to get them through this winter. And there's lots of stuff that we've heard from both candidates about the need for longer term reforms, for tax cuts and other incentives. But many UK households now are facing an acute crisis. We're hearing plenty of stories, we at Nous and clearly in the wider media now as well, people who are really worried about how they're going to pay their bills, about whether they'll be able to heat their homes at all this winter. And so this leadership election couldn't have come at a worse time. We need really strong, clear support from government for those who are hardest hit. And so I'm really looking forward to the new leader being in place, whoever he or she may be, and to hearing what they're going to say in what I can only imagine will be an emergency budget, probably at some point in the next month.
I mean, is that going to be too late, though, do you think, Greg? I mean, there are people out there who say the energy price cap's already been lifted and, you know, whoever comes in is going to be against the clock to get especially targeted support out there.
The race is on. We've seen, of course, energy price rise cap now at £3,500, just over that number for next month. That's bad enough. It's going to get a lot worse. Leading consultants are forecasting that number could exceed £6,000 by April next year. Again, to put that in context, a UK household this time last year was typically paying about £1,000 a year for their energy. A year from now, a typical household will be paying 6 times that. It's not an affordable number for most UK households, not just those on lower incomes. So I think the urgent issue is the humanitarian crisis that we're going to face this winter unless the government takes very active and serious steps to mitigate the worst effects of the crisis for those on lowest incomes. There's also a different challenge here, which is even those who are not on universal credit, who don't have other forms of state aid, are going to be making very difficult choices over the coming months. Our advice to families has been start saving now. If you can afford to save at all, start saving now. You're going to need that that extra buffer as the winter months hit. If it's a cold winter, it's going to be a very, very difficult winter. We're likely to see rationing across large parts of Europe, possibly in this country, which will be the first time in my lifetime I've certainly experienced that. We're also going to see even middle income and higher income families having to make really difficult decisions about where they're going to cut back their spending. So yeah, this leadership election, as I say, it couldn't have come at a worse time. We're really looking forward to seeing the back of it, and more importantly, to seeing the new leader put some very clear measures in place to fend off the humanitarian crisis and to set their stall out about how to try to make sure that the cap is fit for purpose in 2023.
Greg, thanks so much. Greg Marsh there from Nous. He's got some Nous, doesn't he? Joe, I'm going to come to you. I mean, humanitarian crisis, those are strong words, and we really have had an absent government through all of this. This leadership contest feels like it's dragged on way too long. Was it all worth it? Has the needle even moved over the course of this whole process?
No, not really. Not in terms of the general public, and not really in terms of Conservative members either. These contests tend to be won by relatively large margins, and if the polls are to be believed, there's no reason they shouldn't be. Then the same will be true this time around. Liz Truss looks to be heading to victory, and that was the situation at the beginning of the campaign. But at the same time, neither candidate gets above a 4 out of 10 rating among the general public, and none of them reach 6 out of 10 among Conservative supporters at the moment. And that's a situation that was true 3 or 4 weeks ago. It's true now again.
I mean, Stephen, it's pretty foreboding, isn't it? Let's talk about natter together. It's pretty foreboding, isn't it, about, we've got someone coming in that 4 out of 10 people think are decent. 6 out of 10 Conservatives say, well, they're all right. And yet we really do have a massive crisis on our hands.
That's pretty lukewarm, isn't it? And I think that the Conservative Party is making the same mistake that we in the Labour Party did, of electing as our leader someone who is wildly popular within the party, but, to put it honestly, not so popular outside there. And I think it's very, very difficult. But I think the point about energy costs is very important. At the moment in Europe, if you look at Ursula von der Leyen's statement this morning, she's uncoupling gas and electricity. She's actually seeing them as separate issues. And I think they are separate. I think we need to look at that. But this towering in-tray that probably Liz Truss is going to face when she comes into office is not just about energy. Immigration is going to be very, very high. And a lot of people, particularly many people I've spoken to in the Home Office, say that one thing she could do overnight, completely against the grain of Conservative policy, is introduce ID cards. Yeah. Because if you did that, if everybody who came in, actually they had their fingerprints taken, had an ID card, we're the only country in Europe that doesn't know who the hell the people are here.
Joe,
we could do that.
Going back to you, I mean, the previous government was clearly one that seemed to govern by opinion poll, focus group, and the like, very reactive to what the public thought. Where is the public mood right now? One assumes it's all about energy, all about the economy, all about helping households. I mean, what sort of issues do you think that the next Prime Minister, probably going to be Liz Truss, has to focus on?
It's about the cost of living crisis. Nothing else really matters. Immigration, yes, it's important to some extent, but nobody is going to be delighted about an immigration policy if at the same time they can't afford their energy bills. So everything else is a sideshow. It's the only game in town. And if Liz Truss fails to address that in a meaningful way, and simply saying, I'm going to fix it, to quote Boris Johnson, is not enough. The numbers involved here are enormous. We heard from the previous guest that people are seeing £5,000 increases in their bills. Simply a £500 or £1,000 payment is not going to be enough for many people, and yet at the same time represents an enormous amount of government spending.
And very, very briefly, if you were to put odds on, anything changing come Monday and it not being Liz Truss, what sort of odds would you give it?
I think, you can never be absolutely certain about this, but I think it looks pretty certain that Liz Truss will be in Downing Street. The key question is for how long?
Oh, yes. Joe, Stephen, thank you so much. How long indeed? Email me. Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Now, a few managed to garner the status of complete celebrity, recognisable the world over, inspiring awe and controversy in equal measure, captivating, fascinating, and other-dimensional. Well, Princess Diana embodied the very word princess. But a fairy tale, her life was not, coming to a tragic end that whipped up the same headlines and conspiracy theories that dogged her throughout her life. It was 25 years ago today that the horrific accidents happened in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, killing 36-year-old Diana and her partner, Dodi El Fayed. A death that shook the world and broke a nation's heart, that's reshaped the press and whose ripples are still felt through the legacy of her sons and, of course, our future king.
Stunning. Even after 25 years, to be here on the Tunnel de l'Alma and think about this tragic accident. Every time I drive through the tunnel, I think about it and I feel a bit sad.
At approximately 20 past midnight on the 31st of August 1997, Princess Diana, Dodi Fayed and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones entered the black Mercedes, having left the back entrance of the Ritz Hotel. It was driven by Henry Poole, who was 3 times over the legal alcohol limit. Their car attempted to outrun paparazzi on motorbikes. Just a month before, a single photograph of the couple reportedly sold for hundreds of thousands of pounds. The Mercedes sped into the Tunnel de Alma, lost control and crashed into the 13th pillar. Off-duty doctor Frédéric Maillet came across the smoking wreckage seconds later.
In the back, 2 passengers. The man was with no reaction, no respiratory movement. Only one young lady. She was on her knees on the floor of the car, and she was almost unconscious with difficulty breathing.
After calling the emergency services, Dr. Maillet grabs the basic medical kit in his car and crawls into the wreckage next to the princess.
I sat down on the rear seat and I lift up her head and applied the respiratory bag to help her breathe.
Despite helping the most famous woman in the world, Frédéric didn't recognize Diana.
There were a lot of pictures taken. I realized that there were lots of flash inside the Mercedes. I didn't recognize her, as a only doctor in front of 4 severe victims. I had really other things to think about.
The princess was taken to Le Petit Sapatier Hospital for emergency surgery. Doctors fought for 2 hours to save her life, but she passed away.
I'm probably the last person that she heard. That was a big shock. I didn't think she would die so quickly.
A jury in the 2008 inquest found that Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed were unlawfully killed. A combination of a speeding driver under the influence of alcohol, the fact that neither of them were wearing seatbelts, and a pack of paparazzi pursuing them on motorbikes all played a part. 9 photographers were charged with manslaughter in France, but charges were later dropped. Tessie Ojo leads the Diana Award, a charity founded on Diana's belief that young people have the power to change the world. In the days following her death, crowds collectively mourned in public.
People grieved, not necessarily because they knew her or they had met her. People grieved because of her values. They grieved because of the way that her humanitarian qualities, the way that she made you feel visible, the way that she shone a spotlight on issues that were often hidden in society.
Diana's sons, Princes William and Harry, regularly support the charity that continues their mother's work. Her empathy and humanity radiates through the next generation of the royal family, helping to make the world a better place. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, joining me now is the royal commentator, Caroline Aston. I mean, Caroline, we all look back on Diana and, remember this just incredibly captivating personality that would drag all the attention like a vortex towards her in a room. But she was really complicated as well and desperately trying to find happiness in her life. If she was still alive today, what do you think she'd be doing, and do you think she would be happy?
Well, of course, that would depend on what course her life took. Myself, I look back today and I play the game of what if. What if Prince Charles had perhaps the courage to marry the love of his life, Camilla Shand, when he had the chance? What if Diana had gone on to lead the normal kind of life that an aristocratic young girl, her time in London, various jobs, meeting the right sort of young men, and then going on presumably to marry, have a place in the country, a place in the city, and have children and grandchildren that she would enjoy? Because, of course, her life ended like a meteor, a shooting star. She shot across the sky of our consciousness, and then she was gone. And as her brother, Earl Spencer said in that scathing speech on the day of her funeral, Diana was taken from us in the full bloom of her beauty and her vigour. What might she not have achieved? Her charitable work, yes. And of course, she had an effect on the royal family, on royal behaviour, on walkabouts, that really is still rippling out today. This was the princess who knelt down to the level of children, who hugged, who touched, who visited AIDS patients and shook their hands, who did so much that was so very, very different. And of course, I think it's worth mentioning the growing mood there was of public disquiet among the many grieving people on the streets of London, the demands that the Queen bring Diana's sons back from Balmoral, that the Queen came and spoke to her people, which she did. And for me, the abiding memory is that sweet, sweet smell of the dying blossoms in that tsunami of floral tributes that built up at the gates of royal residences. Diana was a diamond, sparkling, brilliant, multifaceted, but, as any jeweller will tell you, many stones have hidden flaws that can be quite destructive. And certainly, at the end of her life, she was being hounded by a press, eager, as your piece said, to get that one snapshot, or indeed, as we know before that one interview, and had really been, yes, in a sense, hounded towards the position where she was in a speeding car, in a French underpass, driven by a drunken driver and pursued by paparazzi like wasps buzzing round honey. Yes, Diana will never be forgotten, and she goes forward in the form of her sons. William, of course, seems to have adapted to press attention rather better than his brother Harry. And on this day, Alex, I'd say this. I don't think she would be particularly happy at the huge rift that has opened up between her two sons. She loved her two boys, and they were, of course, united in grief after her death. And maybe, just maybe, if Harry hadn't had that long walk through London, using his fringe as a barrier between himself and the public, maybe things might be just a little different today. Who'll forget that cushion of white roses on her coffin, labelled
Caroline,
in Harry's
thank you so much.
hand to Mummy.
Wonderful, wonderful as always to hear your thoughts and your views, always expressed beautifully. Caroline Aston, and really briefly, Steve, a quick anecdote, quick thoughts.
Well, I mean, I agree with so much of that. I was a porter at the Middlesex Hospital for many, many years. Broderick Ward, the old female surgical ward, was turned into the first AIDS ward anywhere in the United Kingdom, possibly anywhere in the world. She came onto that ward when AIDS was considered to be the absolute nightmare thing. You could get it. If you touched somebody's fingers, you were going to die an agonising death. She came onto Broderick Ward, and we watched her do it, walked up to someone who had full-blown HIV/AIDS, shook their hand. Well, God love her for that. It was an amazingly courageous, wonderful, warm-hearted thing for her to do.
It's a lovely anecdote. Thank you so much, Steve. And what have you been saying about the things we've been talking about on this programme? On Gorbachev, Paul says he was a great man. I just saw the clip of him and Mrs Thatcher. Real politicians. I miss those days. On policing, Mark says, while the police are their own worst enemy with their positive discrimination, appalling crime stats, weak sentencing, hate crimes and woke antics, going out, attending the mental health epidemic we have in this country is not helping their workload. John says, yes, of course we need more police and shouldn't have closed so many stations, but Labour have encouraged the woke attitudes of dancing and taking the knee. And another Alex says, I totally agree with Priti Patel. I don't recognise in any way police officers serving as I did for 30 years between 1973 and 2003. They need old-style schools, not universities, and scrap their woke training scenarios immediately. And on the Tory leadership race, another Alex says Boris will be back at number 10 by the end of the year. Well, there we go. Lots of interesting thoughts there. That's all I've got time for, though. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. First, though, it's time for the weather forecast. Thank you so much to my guest of the day, Stephen Pound. Glorious, as always. Doesn't he light up the screen and the radio? I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another dry and bright day for most tomorrow with sunny spells and probably feeling, certainly by the afternoon, a little bit warmer than it does out there today. High pressure is controlling our weather currently. There are low pressure systems lurking. We are going to see a change by the weekend. But for most of us, as I said, that high pressure will continue to dominate. It's bringing a breeze in from the North Sea. It's a bit chilly on some of these North Sea coasts, and also just one or two showers drifting in on that breeze across parts of eastern England. But they're few and far between. Most places dry, staying with clear spells overnight as well. It will be a cool night once more, certainly across Scotland. Temperatures in rural areas well down into single figures. A little warmer than last night in the south. Some towns and cities staying in the teens. On to Thursday, and again, a dry and a bright day for most. A bit more cloud over northeast England especially. One or two showers are possible close by to Newcastle and Durham, but say most will stay dry. Late in the day, just the threat of some showers coming up across southernmost parts of England too. The sunshine will turn quite hazy here, but it will be a warm day, 24, 25, and a touch warmer with the sunny spells across Scotland and Northern Ireland too. More of a change as we go through tomorrow evening. More showers drifting up from France and over the Channel to southern parts of England, across the Midlands and into parts of Wales, and they'll continue to drift in during Friday. Somewhat hit and miss, so if you're after rain, this is no guarantee at this stage that you will see some, but increasing chance of seeing showers on Friday here, but also for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, we'll start to see a weather front moving in, bringing more cloud and some showers possibly too. Temperature-wise, well, again, high teens mostly across the far north. We're looking at 21 to 25 elsewhere. These two weather systems then are merging together to form one area of low pressure that gets rid of the high and brings all of us some showery rain this weekend.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less.